Um, One thing, Tobias, I was quite interested to hear that the opera house you're heading now in Leipzig is the third oldest in Europe, I read.
Absolutely.
That's
No,
amazing.
absolutely. Leipzig Opera is the third oldest in Europe from 1693 and has got a very long history, of course. And it's a bourgeois opera house, so it's not created by a count or a king, but it's been the citizens of Leipzig who wanted to have art. And up until the present day, it's a city theater, so we don't get any funding from the state or the Federal Republic, which I find pretty remarkable. Also, the orchestra, the Gewandhaus Orchestra, which is playing in the Gewandhaus Concert Hall, but also in the pit of Leipzig Opera House, is a city orchestra, exclusively funded by the town of Leipzig. So I find that pretty amazing. And yeah, so the Leipzig Opera.
Was that true at foundation? So it was actually founded by the citizens of Leipzig.
Well, yes, yeah. It's been touring. First of all, there have been touring opera groups, but then there have been the orchestra has been founded by the citizens, and also the opera house has a long tradition of citizen ownership. But there have been in between. There have been. The house has been lent to a private entrepreneur, theater entrepreneur. So there have been different phases, but essentially, yes, it's been a city opera house for all its history.
Wow.
So where do you want me to start? Should we talk a little bit more about Leipzig Opera House? Because of course it's a fantastic and fascinating institution. Or do you want more about biographical notes? I don't know.
Well, it's your event, but I think most of our speakers, they usually started by introducing themselves, telling how,
right.
Especially we don't have students here now, but sometimes they will listen, students will listen on YouTube. So it might be interesting for them, what path you made. I've seen that you have done many things. So another question I wanted to ask you is about Handel. I found one of your articles here, why Handel, and so you've been president of this Handel festival, I think. And also, Handel connects you with England. So maybe you can also tell us what brought you to Trinity and what your Trinity experience is and how that influenced, and up to you. I'm really looking forward.
Sure. Okay, so my name is Tobias Wolff. I've grown up in the very south of Germany. So if you have a map in front of you and you see France, you see Switzerland, and you see Germany, it's right in the corner. So it took me about 10 minutes to cycle to Basel, where I've had my first cultural encounters with the theater in Basel, with the orchestra, with many choirs. I did sing in a church choir. I played the violin. And so that was my pupil's life in southern Germany, which spoils you forever, by the way, because culinary context between France and Switzerland is quite spoiling. And so standards about food are quite high if you grow up there. But of course, I always wanted to do something with music. My grandparents were both opera singers. My grandfather was a theater director in Karlsruhe. He was theater director in Koblenz and other German towns. He also did international work as a stage director in Barcelona and other European cities. And so this is the one part of my family, and which goes back to the 18th century, from academics, medics, a very natural scientist environment, but my grandparents then were opera singers. And the other part of my family, there were craftsmen, tailors, and woodworkers. And so it's actually quite beautiful how this comes together now at Opera Leipzig, because of course as director of the house, I'm head of the artistical department, but also of the workshops who build the set designs and make the costumes. So it's quite nice to have a merge of family tradition. So at some point I had needed to decide what I wanted to do with my life. And I wrote applications to some German music colleges and had some different thoughts in mind: to become a conductor, to become a viola player, maybe a church musician, maybe a music teacher. So that was still quite open then. and someone brought to my attention the name Julian Podger, who's a tenor, a singer who studied in Trinity, and they advised me to talk to him about the Trinity music course. And so I did. I called him and found quite fascinating the mixture between music theory, between music practice, on a very high level academic work, but also hands-on musical work, because such characteristic of study you don't have in Germany. You either have this very strict musicological work, so you do just book work, or you go to music college, where you just do the practical work, and musicological work is somewhat secondary. So I found that quite fascinating. I did my interviews in autumn and applied, and I got a place at Trinity. And I have to admit that beforehand, since in Germany you usually apply 2 months before you start studying, it was quite an exception that you plan things way ahead. And when I wrote to Trinity College or to Cambridge University, I actually assumed they would send me some promotional material. I would have time to apply, and I actually got this package saying, you've got another 4 days to apply until the deadline. And so I did, and it was quite fun because I needed to tell my parents shortly before I booked the flight, and they were quite surprised. But then I did the interview, and I had to pick colleges, and I have to admit, I just picked the most beautiful sounding names, which were Trinity, King's, and Corpus Christi, I think. And I was very, very lucky that I was picked by Trinity, because I hadn't had profound information on the college beforehand. But when I actually got there, I was amazed when I entered Great Gate. And I had been there actually a few years beforehand with my parents on a touristical trip. And yeah, I thought it was quite amazing to get into college and to have an interview there. So I had my interview, and I got in. I had 3 fantastic years in Trinity Choir, in Trinity College. And finally, I decided after Trinity to go on to do some more practical work, to study viola. And so I did for another 2 years in Düsseldorf and Essen. I had a year of orchestral practice, which was beautiful because I played all the pieces I ever wanted to play, such as Don Giovanni, Madame Butterfly, Hansel and Gretel, so all the big hits of the repertoire. However, at the end of the year, I just sensed that this is not going to be my way. Because as an orchestral player, people only ever notice you when you play particularly good or particularly bad. So everything in between remains unnoticed. You have virtually no influence on what's happening, because you've got conductors such as Michael who tell you what to do, who take the decisions about tempo, about character, whatever. And all this individual work you've been spending your time with in your practice room doesn't quite matter as much in everyday life as an orchestral player. So this was the moment where I said, this is not going to be my life. And I started working at Düsseldorf Opera House, because a friend of mine was working there that needed someone to organize things. I had always organized things already in Trinity College. I organized some chamber music series, some choral concerts, also orchestral concerts. So organizing was nothing new to me. And he asked me if I wanted to join him at the opera studio in Düsseldorf, and so I did. So this was my first step into the opera life. And Düsseldorf Opera was a fantastic first stage for my career, because they just offered, unwillingly, I have to say, fantastic opportunities. So we didn't have a pandemic, but we had quite a lot of ill people in this year. And so I had the chance to step in for at least 5 people in different departments. And got to know the artistic department. I was doing, I don't know, the subtitles. I was doing repetitor work for the lighting, for the sound department. So shooting cannons in Tosca, for example. So everything that is part of a theater life. And I got to know a house very, very well. And so that was good starting point for an opera career. I even did gave my debut there in a contemporary opera because a lot of people got ill, and I had sung in Trinity College choir, and they were looking for a very small part. But at least I gave my debut as a singer at Düsseldorf Opera, I can proudly say. Unfortunately, it was a contemporary opera, so by the time I was on stage, there was no audience left. So that was the end of my singing career. Well, you know, that was the year in Düsseldorf. Then it happened that I got to know my husband, who was then a freelance singer, and he got offered a job in Leipzig, in the Leipzig radio choir. And that was the point where we had to decide, do I want to have a long distance relationship? Will I stay in Düsseldorf Opera House, or will I join him to go to Leipzig? And I said, well, why not? It's a fantastic city, it's a fascinating city. So we moved to Leipzig in 2002. Eastern Germany, roughly 12 years after reunification, 13 years after reunification, pretty exciting environment still. But already a very musical city. So Leipzig is a absolutely fascinating city. Everyone talks about Vienna as the musical capital. I think it's Leipzig by far, because we had Mendelssohn, we had the first music college in the world, we had Schumann, Johann Sebastian Bach, we had Edvard Grieg here, Leos Janáček studied here, and lots of other composers. And so, yeah, I started to freelance a little bit. I worked at a music shop, at a concert agency. I worked at a ticket office. I worked for the newspaper. I worked for the radio station. So it was a classical freelance patchwork work, which I think is very valuable for me now, because I got to know the music scene very well. For example, standing in a music shop, usually no one notices the salesman when they exchange gossip. So I got to know a lot of news about the musical protagonists, and learned a lot about them. Of course, I learned a lot about repertoire through the newspaper, going to concert 3 times a week. Also the surroundings of Leipzig, going to Erfurt, going to Halle, going to Dresden, all these beautiful theaters who do fantastic repertoire. And I got to know media work through newspaper. Actually, if you do work for a newspaper, you learn how a newspaper works, how an editorial work is done. And also for the radio station, there I did some radio shows about classical music. Also the classical interval, if you've got a live transmission from somewhere, you need someone to talk through the interval, so that was me sometimes. And I always draw a lot of experience from then, when I today have to work with media. I work a lot with journalists, and you have to inform them. You need to know their work, how the deadlines are working, and so I do appreciate that time very much. Although of course it was a hard work to patchwork your income that way. So that was another, let's say, 4 or 5 years, and then I got a job in Gera-Altenburg. Gera-Altenburg is in Thuringia. Thuringia is one of the 15 states in Germany. You might know Weimar, for example. You might know Erfurt. That is Thuringia. However, the biggest theater company in Thuringia is Gera-Altenburg. It's a double theater. Altenburg used to be a very important town in Thuringia. It used to be Sachsen-Altenburg-Gotha. It's actually where the Windsors come from, roughly. So there's a big castle, beautiful theater, which is actually a theater, the link between the Semper Opera in Dresden and the Bayreuther Festspielhaus. It was built by the same architect, but in between the two institutions, and Gera, a beautiful Art Deco theater. And it's a very provincial enterprise, one has to say. But the beauty about province is that you can do everything under the radar, and no one notices you nationally. So you can actually do happy failures and learn from them, and do new things, experiment much more than a big structure than Leipzig Opera. I mean, Leipzig Opera is so big you can't really experiment, because you have to justify all the expenses. Whereas in the province, you can just try out things. So I very much enjoyed working there, trying out repertoire, trying out concert programs, for example. So what effect do pieces have? How do you build a concert program to move your audience? So yeah, that's what I learned there. Then I noticed that I had some ambitions for a leadership post, and noticed that to have a leadership post, I probably needed some more expertise in financial issues, management issues, etc., and decided to do an MBA. I was long thinking about doing cultural management studies or whatever. In the end, I did an MBA in Leipzig because I just wanted to have a year at home. And the Handelshochschule Leipzig, HHL, is one of the most renowned business schools in Germany. And all these cultural management classes, I had the impression that the cultural bit I've done extensively and the management bit was a little bit thin. And the MBA seemed very profound and professional. And so I joined HHL in 2009, studying for a year and a half for an MBA, and had another fantastic experience, because I was really noticing when I did the study how much I had missed the international work. So if you're in the province, it's beautiful, you learn a lot, but you're pretty much cut off from the world in the middle of the Thuringian forests. And it was beautiful to meet people from India, from Lebanon, the United States, from Hong Kong, and all over the world, and discuss leadership issues with them, and discuss different cultural approaches to leadership. And so that was a year and a half. And after that, I applied for several posts and was lucky to become the general director of the International Handel Festival in Göttingen. That festival is the oldest festival for Baroque music worldwide. It was founded in 1920 by enthusiasts, by citizens of the city of Göttingen. Handel has never been there, but they just loved the music and say, why does no one play the operas? And so the conductor asked his wife to sing the main part in Rodelinda, and asked the student orchestra and a lot of citizens, the wine merchant and other people from the Göttingen town. And so they played, after almost 250 years, the first time a Handel opera again, and started something that is, in Germany at least, known as the Göttingen Handel Renaissance. So, and I was very privileged to work with Lawrence Cummings, a British conductor who is the expert for Handel music. And so I had 10 years of very close relationship to Great Britain, also to the British Embassy, exchanges with the London Handel Festival, also with the other Handel festivals all over the world, and had the opportunity with a very small topic to experience how festival works, how again programs work. And after 10 years and the centenary of the festival, I thought it was time to move on, and I applied here in Leipzig. And I was very privileged to be back home, because you know that artists don't usually have a home in a sense, but it's beautiful to have a job in the same town as your partner. That's not doesn't go without saying, at least in Germany. And of course, it's a very big task, because Leipzig Opera is one of the biggest opera houses in Germany. We've got 680 employees. The Opera House comprises 3 different artistic departments: Leipzig Opera, with around about 24 permanently employed singers, with around about 70 chorus members, with 40 dancers in the Leipzig Ballet, with a separate building, which is our house for operetta and musical. They again have an own ensemble with 20 dancers, 20 choir, plus 12 soloists, plus 47 orchestra. And of course, in the Opera House and with the ballet, the Gewandhaus Orchestra plays, which has got another 189 names I have to learn on top of the 680 names. So my past year has been a lot of name learning and meeting people. And we're just at the end of my first season, and we're quite happy. That was pretty successful. We're still waiting for some audience to come back, but you know, having in mind the scenarios we had exactly 1 year ago, we can be very content and happy how things worked out, and we're very enthusiastic about the next season. So this has been a very quick run through my life. Yeah, maybe as a first starting point.
Oh, that's amazing career. So you tried so many things, including MBA. That's really amazing. Didn't you forget music during your years at 2 years at MBA, or did you?
No, not at all.
In the evening.
I actually started to work for the newspaper again, just to earn some money on the side. So I had again 2 or 3 concerts a week, and I actually did some musical work also at MBA, you know, playing at receptions, doing a little MBA choir for Christmas songs, etc. So no, I didn't lose music at all.
Maybe the next, maybe we would like to hear, I don't know about the others, but it would be great to hear about, you know, what is it like to be an opera director? I mean, none of us, maybe Michael Waldron is closest to this world, but us, I mean, especially Clive is particularly fascinated with opera. But what's it like to be an opera director? You know, what do you do every day?
I go to the office. I go to the office. I reply to emails, and I've got meetings.
I'm sure you do much more.
That's
sure much more.
It's not. It doesn't quite. Maybe it's not so different from other companies. However, the product we're selling is much more interesting than many other products. Maybe I can shed some light on that by comparing it to what I did in Göttingen. Because in Göttingen, we were a very small team, 5 people. I had to organize more or less everything. I was responsible for the finances, for the planning, etc. So, you know, there was a stress level concerning Excel sheets because you had a board meeting and you suddenly notice, oh my God, there's a mistake in the Excel sheet and these kinds of things, and you just have to do it yourself. So you're your own controller, which I always find problematic. Whereas now I've got so many departments, so that kind of stress I don't have anymore, because we've got a controlling department, we've got a finance department, we've got an artistic planning department, we've got the opera department, the ballet department, etc. So I'm not so much into the actually operative business anymore. Which I miss sometimes, but I'm much more, it's a little kind of seems sometimes like royal duty. So you've got a conflict, 2 parties come to you and you have to decide what's done. Of course, I am responsible for the artistic planning overall. That doesn't mean I choose the pieces all by myself. Of course, we've got a team with the opera director. We do the opera repertoire, also the head artistic advisor and the head of design. We sit together and say, what kind of teams have you seen recently? What kind of topics do you think are on the horizon within the next year? Then we've got an ensemble, like our singer Ulrike Schneider. What's the next big step for her as a part? Which piece should we choose for her? So these are the fun things we do. So you actually have the opportunity to actually create a cosmos within season planning. Because it seems very easy when you think, well, you know, just pick Magic Flute and Carmen and Aida, and that's what we call in German the ABC weapon is Aida, Bohème, and Carmen to tackle your audience. But it's not quite as easy, because maybe I want to play Aida, but I don't have the musicians in the orchestra because they play Mahler 8th Symphony on the other side of the Augustusplatz, so I don't have the orchestra, so I need a much smaller piece. Then I say, well, then let's do Così fan tutte. And we say, well, yes, you could do Così fan tutte, but the 2 singers which would be ideal for Così fan tutte are actually doing, I don't know, Rossini opera on the side, so you can't do that. So there are many facets, and it takes ages, actually, until you're at the final step of the season planning. Of course, I don't only have opera, but also have the ballet season, and I also have the operetta musical season. So I've got that ×3, and that does keep me quite busy, and that is the core artistic work of the opera. Of course, there are other topics we're dealing with. We have the target to produce a sustainability concept for the Opera House. There are different political issues we are dealing with. Of course, as a city theater, we get, we get issues played and sent into the house. which we need to tackle. And yeah, so, but you know, in the end, I don't think the basic structure is much different from any other company.
There was Paul, I think, wanted to ask.
Yeah, yes. No, I was just to ask Tobias, in business, in my experience, at least working for a long time with an Austrian bank, with Vienna as a headquarters, lots of politics there, I know what you mean. You find you spend a great deal of time on people and the characters of people, and choosing who you can choose is a very key part of being able to run an effective operation. What's your experience on that human relationship, choice of people side of things? You've got scope, or is it limited by the nature of the institution?
Well, there are different aspects to that. In general, I'm very happy that I went through a crisis at this provincial theater in Thuringia, because what I learned there is that you can't run a theater if you don't have the right people. And of course, you can choose them by their CV and see are they theoretically capable of dealing with things. But then if it comes to crisis, you need the right people who actually carry things away. And I'm very happy that about this lesson, because it frees you from a lot of choices you have. Of course, if you become director, you can, you know, basically everyone applies to you and wants to have a job. But I think personal experience, personal relationship, faith and trust are pretty important. So I've got two, I would say, friends, and this is not kind of the mafia kind of friends definition, but in the sense that I trust them, that I can trust them with also insecurities, with doubts, with questions I have, and I know they don't have their personal agenda. And I think this is extremely important to have one or two people on your side. You actually know they see the business and you can trust them. That is one aspect. Then there are other aspects. Of course, if you talk about artistical quality, it's pretty easy because we've got auditions, and never mind the character of the person, whoever sings best gets the role. Then sometimes if we experience their characters, which might be more or less charming, for the second engagement, we might consider their personality. But for the first engagement, it's, you know, it's the voice. And it's actually quite easy in a way, except that we all have different tastes about singers, but, you know, the structure is quite easy. And then, of course, in Germany, we have also a very strong trade union. We've got unlimited contracts, sometimes in separate departments. And I find it very challenging, but also fulfilling to think about lifetime careers, because you need to do that, because you know they're staying on forever. So you need to keep them motivated, you need to develop them. And I think to a certain degree, frustrated staff members are also a failure of the leadership. Sometimes not, but you know, I mean, this is with 680 people, you have a staff issue every day, more than once. Sometimes people have concerns, sometimes, especially with the topic of sustainability, I've got people who want to rush forward and said, we've got this big list we always wanted to do, and you have to actually keep them back and say, oh, stop, you know, we need to have a full strategy for the whole house, and we can't have one department rushing ahead and the others kind of coming back. And then, of course, since some people have been here for 20, 30, sometimes 40 years, they didn't pick me as a boss. So they just get, you know, city just says, here's your new boss. And that's very different, because sometimes people are very reluctant to say, well, bosses come and go, I just do my work, and they do it well. Sometimes they are critical. I've got a lot of fears in this house, because we still have a lot of people from GDR times, and they have experienced the reunification. After the reunification, the houses were empty. There were big discussions about closing the whole culture altogether. We had that again about 15 years ago. There was a big opera crisis due to a certain director, so the houses were empty. So it's very, you can actually detect in the house when shows are sold out, everyone is happy. as soon as the sales drop under a certain point, it's not only a financial problem, but a huge atmospheric problem, because they suddenly start to doubt you personally as a leader of the house. And they don't see the situations, well, never mind Corona, whatever, but just say the house is empty, you picked the wrong pieces, we're all going to be kicked out. I don't know. It's a very simplistic view, but it's I think that's a big challenge, to not let yourself be influenced too much about that. Because as I said, if you're new and you've got 680 people and you go through the house, you can get absolutely hysterical in no time if you want to. And I try not to. So that is the big staff challenge we have.
John, thank you. John had a question. John?
Yeah, absolutely. Tobias, absolutely fascinating. Thank you. I declare my hand slightly. I sit on the board of one of the London orchestras, and we've noticed since the end of COVID something you touched on, and that is we're back to. We were covering 97% of seats. Frankly, on a cost base, it's now about 75. There are more people in the house, but the complexion of the audience who's coming in is different. This in turn is going to affect programming. We're programming 5 years ahead. But are you actually seeing the same thing? You touched on it twice over. Once talking about the sort of the cauldron of life in Leipzig over the last 20 years, but also more recently. Are you seeing that, and will it affect programming?
It is very difficult to talk about the audience in Leipzig, because point A, Leipzig has grown immensely. We've won 20% of inhabitants in the last 20 years. So, when I moved here, we had around about 495,000 inhabitants. Now we're over 600,000. The people now are different, because with Amazon, with BMW, with Porsche, with Bayersdorf, a lot of people came from the West. So you don't have this classical, used to be classical Leipzig bourgeois audience. So a lot of learnings from the past don't work anymore. This also refers to Corona, because before Corona, we could be sure that when you put on Carmen with a relatively decent cast, it's going to be sold out. And that doesn't happen anymore. And I've got that with many, many other colleagues, that they say they get really stressed because, the truths we had don't apply anymore. And we have got surprises on many other ends. I was always told Mozart never works in Leipzig, and we put on Don Giovanni. It's a fantastic performance, and we've got a lot of young people in there, and we've got and we had full houses. So that was something they always told me, this is never going to work. And on the other hand, they said, oh, Wagner was fantastic. We had full houses with Wagner, and now we said put on Wagner, and it doesn't work anymore. And it's very fascinating if you actually go to the sales, not to the salespeople, but to the I don't know how's the name for the evening services at the doors and the wardrobes and the ticket desks. If I go to them and talk to them now, they say, it's very fascinating because yes, we have got a little less audience, but the audience entirely is totally different than before Corona. And that was something that really got me, and I went to my marketing department and said, could I have a kind of statistics? And we've got around about 25% of people who've never been to the opera before, which I think is an immense number. And you actually can sense this is different audience, but it also works different. So they're not triggered as much by Wagner or Carmen or whatever as the other audience was, and we don't quite have a feeling yet what it is that triggers them. And we've got a lot of, we're very privileged because the university is actually built around the Opera House. So there's for around about 30,000 students, it's not very far.
So you've got a cheap audience as well in that case.
Yes, our administration is not very happy about a lot of students because they don't bring in a lot of money. But of course, I'm very happy because I think, on a long term, this is going to be our audience. And we've got around about, 80 to 150 students every night because we've got a special service. If you have got the so-called Young Opera Leipzig card, you pay 10 euros per ticket, and that's about 80 to 150 in good times. Now, of course, they're holidays. It doesn't work.
That's true here now as well. Same thing.
Yeah. And so I couldn't say that young people are not interested in opera anymore. Also, I couldn't say that we've got exclusively a certain generation that might refer the most for maybe operetta. If we've got Gräfin Maritza or Fledermaus or something like that, that might be the oldest of our audiences. But ballet is a very young audience. We've got in musical, we've got a very young audience, and in opera it's actually quite mixed. But yeah, it's very tricky because we're also planning ahead now for 2026, 2027. And I was talking about the stress level in Göttingen, that you're responsible for everything on an operative level. My stress level now is, do I take the wrong decision for 2027? Because there's actually no way to correct it on the way. Because we've got more than a year beforehand, they hand in the draft, the sketches for the costumes and set designs. Then it's going to be built, and then it's an opera production to put all that together is about 500,000, whatever. And you can't just say, oh, we've just found out Rossini doesn't work, so let's replace it by whoever, Johann Christian Bach. It's not going to work. So, I mean, now I have to take the decision and I have to trust that it works in 3 years. And this is, again, one of the points where I'm absolutely happy and grateful that the season planning we did in 2019 before Corona worked so well after Corona, because everything we played this year was planned in 2019. And it's actually a miracle that it worked so well.
Are you commissioning as well?
Yes, we are. We have got a commissioned opera in 2025, which is quite fascinating because we had a long way choosing the libretto, because again, you need to think about what interests people. Why would they go to the opera in 4 years? So what kind of story are you going to tell them? Because when we started doing that, everyone was doing Madame La Peste or the Plague of London, or these pandemic stories. And it is quite tempting to say, oh yeah, everyone is interested in pandemic stories these days. But you have to free yourself of the present and really kind of take a little Montgolfier.
Nabucco is the story of emigration. Absolutely, yeah.
Whatever, and so we decided for a novel by a Canadian author. Ironically, she's called Sarah Leipziger, and she wrote a novel which is called Coming Up for Air. Coming Up for Air, it's about, well, we do have the time, so I do tell you a little story because it's a very good story. It's about L'Inconnu de la Seine. L'Inconnu de la Seine, it's the story of a young girl, probably servant maid at some bourgeois household. She gets pregnant, she kills herself. True historical facts, kills herself, and then one of the artists takes the mask off her face because he thought she was particularly beautiful. And this Inconnu de la Seine was a motif which was actually copied by almost everyone in the 19th century. So there are very many copies by different artists, and so that's part number one. Part two is a toy maker in Norway who lost his son in a very dramatic accident on a lake, and but he's then commissioned by 2 American doctors to develop the life-saving puppet. You've probably all done your first aid course, and in the end, he thinks, what kind of face do I give her? Because you don't want to kiss a machine or train with a machine because it's, kind of a first aid. And he gives the puppet the face of L'Inconnu de la Seine. So this is story part number 2. And then we come to fictional part, which is a Canadian sportswoman swimmer who has got a lung disease and needs a transplantation. And so we've got this big circle of life and breath and water. And we thought it was very beautiful, and we had this feeling that maybe the topic of breath, we have got very many long COVID cases now, and so taking this part of interest now and making it higher on an aesthetical level, we thought it might work actually, also in 3 years, that people think about breathing and about life and about life cycles. So this is the composition we are having for 2025. We have got a British librettist because I need to say that contemporary music scene in Germany is somewhat in a crisis. That refers also to contemporary music theater writing.
But
How do you put?
he or she's doing it in German or in English?
No, it's
The
in
libretto.
English actually.
Okay,
The libretto is
fine.
done in English. Also because we're still looking for international cooperation partners.
Okay.
But the problem is that, let's put it bluntly, German music is only considered as modern if it absolutely hurts your ears. Libretti, opera libretti in Germany are only considered to be adequate and artistic if they're as complex as possible. And we did do a lot of research and read a lot of libretti, but the level of complexity the German contemporary music scene has got to, we thought, is far too high. So we, decided to go a different way, choose a British librettist. We've got a German composer, Bernd Franke, who has a big talent for really taking the listener by the hand. This is why his career is more or less exclusively internationally and not in Germany. So he's got performances all over the world, in Japan, in Taiwan, in United States, Great Britain. He's one of the really big international composers of Germany, but within Germany he's not very renowned because they all say, oh, it's not contemporary, because it's actually nice to listen to.
You mentioned that you see that German music scene is in a crisis. Why? Can you elaborate?
Well, I think that the contemporary music scene, yes, I can elaborate. It's, how do I put it? Of course, in music traditions, there are always different strands of developments. We all kind of see the way towards Schoenberg, that you get more romantic, more complex, and that there was a point where there needed to be something new. And I have to say that Arnold Schoenberg is someone who actually drew his inspiration from music history. He was absolutely fantastic also in style copies and had this craftsmanship. And I have the impression that in Germany, only the deconstructive element of Schoenberg got taken further, and not the music history that was behind him. So I do encounter some German composers who actually don't know instruments anymore. So I played a lot of contemporary music things on a viola, and I said, this tone is not on my instrument. So either you did it wrong, or you need to give me 15 minutes time to tune one way and back the other way. So I think there has been more or less a big focus on deconstruction, on performance, and that as a result, contemporary German music has really navigated itself into an absolute niche, where only an absolute minority of people are willing to follow anymore. So there was a long time when we all thought, okay, this is art, and they told us it's art, so we need to listen. And of course, they're fantastic pieces also. And we had Henze and others. So there are still fantastic German composers on the market, but the broad scene of German composers in the last 20 years have really concentrated also on electronics and things like that. And we tried to making a chamber opera, and you think, well, I can't actually put it on because I need 5 guest musicians, which I need to pay for the electronics and the Aunt Martineau and the Alphorn, something else. So I think German music needs to get back a little bit to normal life again, which happens actually because we've got a big. I've had interesting discussion with a music theater teacher, and there is a young generation of composers who say we're not interested in Darmstadt anymore. That's done. That's the past. And they want to do all film music for Netflix, which would have been a big in the 1990s. You wouldn't have dared to say I want to make film music. This was something you were damned to do if you didn't earn your life any other way. So I think there's a big also after Corona, there's a big change now in German contemporary music scene, but it will take a while until I think we're back in the middle.
That's, of course, your opportunity now to put Leipzig into the center of this new revival of German music.
I wish, however, our budgets for commissions are so small. So, within in a contract cycle of 5 years, there's only one piece I can commission financially. So I'm afraid that'll be not enough to change musical life in Germany.
There's John has another question, and next
Yeah,
I'd like to ask afterwards.
I apologize.
Michael, maybe after John.
So I apologize for butting in again, but Tobias, you struck another chord on contemporary music. Oddly enough, we've seen something in the mirror of what you've just said, and that is that we now have a large acoustic orchestra playing on instruments that would have played on the end of the 19th century. Doing sessions, shouldn't call it that really, but doing sessions for games. And it seems to me it's quite extraordinary that you've got these people want to play games, and instead of wanting electronic music alongside the games, they actually want acoustic music. So it's as it were, the contemporary has flipped the other way.
Well, it's always tricky what you would describe as contemporary, because there have always been waves. You've always had in music history, you had a degree of complexity. Then it was led back to simplicity. You had big, complex Baroque coloratura arias. Then there was Gluck with his reform opera. Then I don't know. There were other developments in a similar way. But yes, the wish for live music, for a sound body is still there, and I'm not so afraid, because people say, well, with artificial intelligence, etc. We might have the end of culture. I don't think that's the case. I think people are still fascinated by a live sound. People are fascinated by an unamplified live sound. That's always when you get kids in the opera and an opera singer sings 3 notes, they all say, oh, it's so loud without a microphone. How can she do that? So that's, the education part we maybe need to talk about also at some point. So I'm not so worried about the fascination. I think on a more neutral level, we need to talk about infrastructure at some point, because, of course, we have got a staff issue. I mean, during Corona and afterwards, we have had a lot less applicants at music colleges. So we know that in 5 years, we're going to lack artists. That's not going to be a problem for the big opera houses. That's going to be a problem for the small theaters and opera houses. And when you struggle anyway with finances, with politics in the province, and then you've got problems also ensuring the quality of the arts, that's, I think, going to be a life or death question for many theaters in the next 5 to 10 years. I've a little bit lost where I came from. I don't know what the question was again. Maybe you could help me.
It was really about acoustic instruments and live performance.
Okay,
which you've answered. Yeah,
I mean, you said I had to smile a little bit, because you said they're basically playing on instruments from the 19th century. I think you're underestimating how much these instruments have been developed, especially in the wind section. So the oboes, they're much louder than historical oboes.
Yeah, and clarinet as well, of course. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
And especially the percussion section. I mean, that has grown. I mean, I asked our percussionists in Gera how many instruments he played, because I don't know if you know this. If in the score there's an instrument which is not explicitly mentioned in the usual set of instruments, the percussionist has to play it. So this is, never mind if it's actually a percussion instrument. So if you've got a singing saw or something like that, the percussionist is giving it, because that's the done thing. If you play percussion, you have to play everything. And I asked our percussionist how many instruments he played in his career, 40 years, and he said over 250 in different instruments in this career, because he had, virtually everything that's not done by anyone else gets given to the percussionists.
He got the guillotine in Dialogue of the Carmelites. Yep.
Yeah, something like that.
Michael, maybe next.
Hi, yeah, thank you. This has all been really, really fascinating. One of the things that I only recently became aware of when I was doing a show up at the, I don't know whether you know the Buxton Festival here in the
UK. Course.
Was the need for these opera houses and these theatres to keep their technology and their infrastructure growing all the time as technology advances with lighting and there are increasingly people want projections and all these sorts of things. For you, how big and an important part of the future of the Opera House itself is this technology and all those things that sort of complement the music?
Well, it's absolutely vital because, of course, our direct competition are also musical theaters. And if you go to Lion King or to, I don't know, Starlight Express, whatever, this is what you see. And you always think, well, why is my theater not doing that? So it's absolutely vital. Of course, we see in many theaters, well, the history also of politics, because you can see that very well at the Deutsche Bahn. There have been big savings at the Deutsche Bahn and saving pressure and economic pressure. And what did they do? They saved at the infrastructure. And this is what we see now. We've got virtually no punctual train anymore, which is really hurting my honor as a German. We defined ourselves for centuries about our punctuality, and this is really shaming. So, and the same with theaters.
Come to Japan.
Absolutely, yeah. And sometimes, or Switzerland already, it's a little closer, and they always say the Swiss Germans are the better Germans, so they're even more punctual and clear.
Switzerland is good with Japan is better.
But this is really something we see also in the theaters, that they have stopped investing in new technologies in the 80s and 90s. And of course, some theaters took up, and we've got, huge investment needs. If you see Staatsoper Stuttgart is going to be refurbished now, and since they haven't done anything with it for the last 30 years at least, the estimate now is 1 billion euros for the refurbishment, the general refurbishment of Stuttgart. And it's as a taxpayer, you just gasp at it, 1 Milliarde, 1 billion. It's incredible. But it's a consequence because they haven't done anything with the houses for years, and they've just left it. And this is also part of the economic pressure that's been put on culture for ages. And I'm very happy that we've got a big change in attitude now, that politicians don't talk too much anymore about efficiency, etc. But we have got a big discussion about Gemeinwohl. I have to say I'm lacking the English word for that. The public welfare, maybe. And
public good.
And we're actually seeing that this changes totally the attitude towards hospitals, towards theaters. Because they've seen what happened after in the 80s, all this economic pressure, that things break down now, and it's not working anymore. So some cities have been very wise, such as Leipzig. One have to say they're always invested in their theaters and their buildings. So yes, we do have 1.6 million for some new staircases, etc. But this is kind of okay, and it's not a 1 billion euro discussion, which then gets existential for the theaters, because an investment in Leipzig Opera House, people might say, oh, does it have to be so expensive? But if you say 1 billion, do we actually need an opera house? And this is what's happening, and I think this is very dramatic, and the direct result of economic pressure in the last 30-40 years. I think you switched off your microphone. I can't hear you.
Yeah, your microphone's off. Yeah.
Okay.
Tobias, in the meantime, don't go to England if you want to have a quiet life in terms of getting the funding, because there is you followed the English National Opera story. Quite horrifying.
I know.
No,
absolutely. We're very, very privileged. I have to say, we're absolutely, really very privileged as German cultural scene. However, within this privilege, there are different topics to be discussed.
I was thinking, Clive, you are a fan of Opera. Why don't you engage?
Well, thank you. It's very fascinating, interesting. In particular, the concept of the ensemble theatre as opposed to singers flying in, flying out. And it sounds, from what you've been saying, that you have a consistent team and a locally based, a locally anchored enterprise. I just wondered how that affects the fact that you are funded not by the federal government, but by the by the town must encourage, must have some impact, I guess, on repertoire and the way you market the theatre. Are there any? I just wonder what the particular aspects of your setup are that, or sorry, what that means for your repertoire and the way you present the theatre, whether any particular themes you try to develop over a period, and which particular pieces you choose. I'm just curious about that.
That's a very good question. It's, in a way, the ensemble theatre do limit artistic freedom. One aspect. I come to the big positive aspects later. But of course, if I've got a set of singers, at the Göttingen Handel Festival, I had a part like Rodelinda, and we know this particular soprano sings that very well. She looks ideal for Rodelinda, so you cast them. Here at Leipzig Opera House, that works differently. If you put on Rodelinda, it just says who of the three sopranos could do that best. And I find that very challenging, and it's really surprising in some ends, because, for example, we did Giulio Cesare by Handel, and all the singers said, oh, we can't do that, that's Baroque, we don't do Baroque, we've never done Baroque. And for a festival, of course, you would cast not a single one of our singers, because they're not experts in Baroque repertoire. So in a sense, you have to make compromises, but I think it's very rewarding, because we had this soprano, and she did Lucia di Lammermoor and La Traviata, and Czech soprano said, oh, I've never done Baroque, I don't know if I can do this. And, Handel is a very good composer for singers, so just give it a try. And she's absolutely amazing, and she does that very well. And you'd never do a recording with her doing that part, because the market for Baroque opera is very specialized, and, I'm not sure if you're familiar with ornamentations in Baroque opera. If you've got part A, and if it comes back, you do ornaments. And she does them as you would do as a 20th century Czech soprano who does mainly La Traviata, which I think is sometimes much more authentic than the out-composed things some conductors give to their singers and say, learn that. Because, of course, ornamentations have always been and had an improvisatory character, but she's far off from any Baroque authenticity. But it's so beautiful, because she's so authentic as a person, and in a way, it's quite authentic. So, you do get a lot of rewards with ensemble theatre. Of course, you have identification figures. We have got audience, they say, I don't mind which piece there is. If Olena Tokar is singing, I come. If she sings Michaela, or if she sings operetta, whatever, I'm a big fan of hers, because she's got a big Insta account, and she's got a photo of her triplets, and going to the park, and, being all Leipzig, and taking photos wherever. So she's a big local star. So you'd say, we always say at home, I'm world famous. So no one knows her outside Leipzig, but within Leipzig, she's a big star, and she's got a fan base. And that is quite a beauty also for the sales department, because, you don't, you know the kind of topics you have to bring. But of course, if you do it wisely, you pick pieces that are good for the singers you have. So it's not that you say, I always wanted to do this piece. If you don't have the singers in the ensemble, just don't do it. Because why would you? Because you have to buy a lot of guests. And sometimes we do that because if you've got, for example, we started off with Undine by Albert Lortzing. We needed a double cast because no other theater is doing that now. So we had about, 16 singers on the cast of Undine. And Othello premiere was like 6-7 weeks later, so there would be no chance for any of the cast members to do that. So that was the bit where we said, okay, we're going to have guests for Othello, because then we start with Don Giovanni rehearsals, and then again the whole ensemble is in Don Giovanni with double cast. So that is the ensemble theatre. And the repertoire theatre, I have to say we're questioning if that is still valid for the future. It seems to work only for the very big titles. So Carmen, Traviata, whatever. It doesn't seem to work anymore for some lesser known works. And then there's the question, if you really want to pay the rent for, we've got 15,000 square meters of storage space. If you really want to pay that, if the house is not full. So this is really big questions. Do we want to keep all the Wagner productions, or are we throwing some of them away? To save storage space. So storage space is a big issue at the moment because our contracts run out in 2 years, and 15,000 square meters in a booming town in the middle of the city is very hard to find. So we're actually facing this decision now. Actually, are we getting rid of repertoire theater and only concentrating on new productions, or do we find new storage space and or build new storage space to keep that tradition of repertoire theater? Some pieces work well. We've just had the 120th performance of La Traviata, which has had its premiere in 1994. So we play 5 shows a season, and it still works, and some others don't. So it's a big question how to develop a theater for the future.
Just one thing, and we also hear horror stories here about Regietheater. Is that something that is an issue with you? You have to play on the conservative side for some things, or you?
I'm laughing because this is such a standard question I get asked so many times.
Really?
If you've got an introduction to an opera, the audience usually asks, "Is it going to be beautiful or modern?" So this is, well, again, it's a little bit like the question of the about contemporary music. Also, German Regietheater has reached a level of complexity that we, I think, need to loosen it a little bit. I think I'm a big fan of Regietheater because it helped us to get rid of this whole Nazi pseudo-traditional aesthetics which there was after the war. One really has to say, if you watch opera films, then it is really a very dusty way of presenting stage things. So Regietheater was important, but then of course at that time you had an audience who actually knew the plot of Traviata, who knew how old productions looked like, could refer to, could see the irony, and now we've got about at least four generations who've never seen I say in italics, original version. So we need to get back to telling the story more, because also there the kind of performance and destructive side has become a little bit self-sufficient, to put it that way. And we as a team have said we need to tell good stories. I don't think we need to go back, which happens now. Some people are doing actually historic performances in historical costumes. My experience is that that creates a very big distance for a big part of the audience. And I think we had a very good approach with Don Giovanni, which was a big sales hit here, because it's a very modern approach. You had Don Giovanni it was building. At the top of the building in the maisonette flat was Don Giovanni with all his lovers, and in the basement on the bel étage you had the Comtour and Donna Anna, and Leporello was actually the Lieferando. I don't know what it's the delivery service, and you had all these different delivery guys. It was funny. It was a good story. You could actually understand the characters. So we actually want to tell good stories, and we want you to understand the characters. And if you need a modern setting for that, or traditional setting, I think it's up to the directing team. So I think it's a mistake to make it modern by all means, but it's also a mistake to say, let's get back to all traditional, because then we get a museum. And Regie itself is an art, and it's interesting and can give you a lot. And if I think about Herbert Wernicke in the 90s in Basel, it just moved me so much in many ways that it gave me so much. So I wouldn't want to get rid of Regietheater, but I know that certain parts of the audience have a very clear picture about what they want to see. And again, I'm very happy about subsidies, because you could do that at the Metropolitan Opera, because all the rich widows wouldn't give you the money to run the Opera House. So whoever gives the money, of course, influences the artistic product. Never mind artistic freedom, wherever the money comes from, defines also the artistic aesthetic. So again, it's actually possible, due to the higher subsidies, to do Regietheater in Germany. And as I say, if you need to run a profitable business, there's no way it would do Regietheater, because it's a risky business, and sometimes it's full because it's scandal, but sometimes it's totally empty because people think, oh my God, what's this? But you know, just to come over and have a look. I'm sure they're going to be very different experiences depending on which theater you're going to. And the funny thing is that mostly the singers love it, because they say we're actually challenged, because they hate productions where just put at the edge of the pit and just sing the aria and go back. And they actually love many modern productions. That's always, because in Göttingen I was said, oh, the poor singers. And I said, no, the singers love it. It's not the singers. It's, if you don't like it, say it. It's no problem. We can discuss it, but don't hold the singers hostage for your arguments.
Yeah. Thank you. So I just make one comment, which is recently in the Royal Opera House, there's been 2 Verdi operas, Aida, Trovatore. Aida was done a bit like, it looked a bit like North Korea, and it finished with them dying in a missile silo. But actually, it worked very well because of the interaction between the people. The Trovatore was done in traditional costumes, but a bit weird, and with lots of dancing, which interferes with the music and the concentration. So it's kind of half traditional, but not nearly as realistic in a way as the slightly much more modern Aida. So I get the point. It's the skill with which it's done maybe is the key thing.
Yeah, it's the skill, and it's also the dedication, because I've experienced very traditional opera productions and I was bored to death. In Tosca, we had the original Engelsburg Angels Castle in Rome reconstructed. But, you know, it was a kind of Thursday afternoon repertoire performance, and they, you know, had a bored conductor, bored singers, and whatever. You just say, it doesn't help to have, you know, beautiful setting if the people are not doing what they do with passion. And on the other hand, you know, you had a La Traviata at the Hanover State Opera where the director said, it's an empty stage, there's just one person, which is going to be Traviata. Everyone else is singing from the side, you don't see them, so it's just the imagination of Traviata actually tells you the plot. And it was absolutely amazing because he had such a passionate singer with Nicole Chevalier, and she just got the audience. It was sold out every time, because we're talking about passion. And I'm absolutely sure once we tell a good story with passion, it doesn't really matter what the costumes and the set design, if it has a logic in itself.
Martin, you're
muted.
You're unmuted now, yeah.
Okay, I just found Walter. Why don't you join? Walter is not Trinity, but he's an old friend of mine from business. So Walter,
honorary member. Yeah,
that's right. Walter, you're we
muted.
Can't hear you. Can't hear you. Can't hear.
Bottom left.
It doesn't.
Little bottom left, little beautiful.
Walter, your microphone doesn't work. We can't hear you.
Should be a mute button at the bottom left of the screen somewhere.
He is unmuted, but
he's unmuted. Yeah, so
microphone is not connected or something. It doesn't work.
I should quickly throw in that I had the pleasure of going to Bayreuth last summer, and the audience was the problem, not the singers. It was quite an extraordinary reaction. Part of the audience hated it so much, just booing and shouting, that I've seen something I've never seen before, which is the soprano goes down to the front for the curtain call, and she points to 4 members of the audience and goes on the stage of Bayreuth. So that
there is passion.
Then the boos erupted. It was quite an amazing thing. I've never ever seen it, but then that was really
well, there's passion. I think there are not enough boos in the theatre world these days, because we know historically there was much more boo and much more direct reaction.
That's true.
And I really hope we're getting back to a more direct reaction, because I sense sometimes that people come to me and say, I didn't really like it, but I'm not an expert. And I always say it doesn't matter.
No,
it's our job. It's our job to make it understandable or at least feelable for every member of the audience. You don't have to be an expert. And I've been I mean, as I said, you know, one part of my family are craftsmen, and I've been with my aunt to piano festival, and she absolutely was spot on about every single pianist we saw there. Although she, of course, she described it with very, very different words. So because she couldn't say, well, you know, his technique was kind of not quite spot on, but he said, oh, it sounded a little blurry here and there. So I mean, she could understand it. So and of course, the Bayreuth audience is a community in itself. I mean, the whole Wagnerian audience is a very, very closed community, which is very strong on their own opinions, and it's not so easy to convince them about changes and novelties, which is fine. And, you know, I mean, the beauty is we've got so many theaters here that there's the chance to offer different things. So there are theaters who offer really totally traditional stuff, and there are others who go over the top with avant-garde. But on the whole, I'm quite happy about Germany because you've got so many different facets of culture you can consume.
Let's have a look if weiter, does it work now?
Yeah. Have I been successful?
Works now. Yes.
Yes.
Okay. That is good. Sorry for all the mishaps. And also apologies for being a little bit late. I had my birthday yesterday, so probably...
Happy birthday.
Yes.
Hope you went to the opera for your birthday celebration.
Well, unfortunately not, but I do frequent the opera here in Frankfurt, where I reside at the time, as much as I can. And I have 2 kids that I'd like to lure into music whenever I can as well. And that's also the origin of my question to you. Actually, I have 2 questions, if I may. One deals with how to lure young people into opera, and what type of initiatives there are, and hopefully not only from your side. And that's one question. And the second one is a business question. Rather, how do you deal with competition, and to what extent do competition and cooperation between opera houses and festivals also play a role, and how do you deal with that? Do you have some type of approach, or is this basically a type of ad hoc reaction kind of management style that you apply that?
So coming back to your question of education, I think that in Germany there's never been as much music education as these days for privileged kids. I need to make this exemption because music courses in schools are degrading. We've got less and less music teachers, so I'm actually a little bit concerned about what happens about music in school. But if we look at music institutions, they all have 2, 3, 4 music education stuff. So there's a lot going on. Fantastic concepts, modern concepts, very varied concepts. So I'm not so worried about that. I'm more worried about the music education on a broad sense, because we have had school classes where not a single kid was able to sing because they didn't get any music. The parents don't sing with them anymore. They didn't get any music courses. So especially on the primary level or lower secondary level. So the Leipzig Opera has a department with 2 people on the education, no, 3 people on the direct education stuff. They do productions with young people, for young people. We have got productions on the big stage, classical Hansel and Gretel. We've got Alice in Wonderland, the Wizard of Oz, etc. You can actually come with your family. We've got a big kids choir with over 200 children actually joining, singing on stage in Cardamom Bohème, whatever. We're doing some big projects. So for the beginning of my season, we did a big youth project with 3 schools on the Augustusplatz with about, 3,500 people and an open air specialized walking act theater group. which was all about future. And so we do take care about that. We could do much more because the aim is there again from a selection of schools. There are a lot of schools who never call us, who never get back to us when we call them. And it really depends on the engagement of the teachers. And since there are less and less music teachers, we sense that the number of schools we're actually getting reactions by or can interact with is getting smaller and smaller. So I do get some concerns. But of course, you know, in the classical privileged kid with parents who care, we have got a lot to offer.
Yes, thank you. Similar situation in many cities, I must say.
Oh, and the business question. Sorry, I didn't reply to the business question. So competition, I think we need to define competition because, of course, we've got a direct competition, such as if there's a Mahler festival in the Gewandhaus, of course, some people are not going to the opera. If there's a Bach festival in town, sometimes we get even more people coming to our house because they're just more culturally interested people in town. Then competition, musical theaters. We've got, of course, the privilege to be subsidized. So if you go to Count of Monte Cristo in our operetta house, you pay about 35 euros per ticket and not 125 in Hamburg. But the thing is, what we noticed is that competition is very different than what you think might be competition, because especially after Corona, competition was not any other cultural institution but restaurants, because people said, oh, I haven't seen him and her for ages, so let's go and eat. So the alternative to go to the opera was to go have dinner with someone. And alternatives competition can also be Netflix, that you say, well, are we going out or are we staying in? And we have a very strong feeling that after Corona plus energy crisis plus inflation, people tend to take much greater care about how to spend their money than before. I had that at festival as well. So if we raised the prices, the core product was not a problem. It was still as sold out as before. But if I take the Handel Festival, so if people before bought the opera ticket plus 3 chamber concerts, then after raising of the prices, they bought the opera ticket, but only 1 chamber concert. And the same refers to us. So we have a big break now in the kind of bread and butter business where we say, you know, it's the usual repertoire, whatever, Carmen, where people say, yeah, I've seen it twice, but yeah, why not? Let's, you know, see it again. They don't do that anymore because they say, I only spend my money on things that are absolutely worth spending it on. And that is a big issue because you can't have this cultural Grundrauschen, I don't know what the word is, so the cultural buzzing which we had before, that just things happened and they were fine. And people were spending money, weren't too enthusiastic, but they went there anyway. So that dropped. So you have got, so things that didn't sell before don't sell now. Things that were sold out before are still sold out, but the whole thing in the middle is really breaking apart. And that makes life pretty complicated. And we are still in definition what competition means. We do see obstacles now post-Corona because a lot of big shows have been moved to this year. So we've got much more big rock concerts, and you might say that is not competition. But if you've got Rammstein playing in the stadium, if you've got a football game, you might not say a football game is a competition, but if you have a football game, every single tram is stuffed. So the elderly lady who's got problems walking anyway, she's not going to go out of her house. So that is not a competition, but it's an obstacle. And we sense that if there's an RB Leipzig game, or UEFA is coming here, and the European Cup is coming in 24, of course, some people won't leave the house because the stadium is bang in the middle of the city center. And they just say, there are too many people, I feel insecure, I don't want to leave the house. So it's, as I said, it's very hard to define what competition is.
Thank you very much. I thoroughly enjoy these insights of, and also the basic explanation of why you do it. That you gave us before. I think that was very enlightening, and I kind of feel that way because when I had to decide what to study for about a year, I was playing with music, and then I thought, how can I combine business with music, which I then embarked on later on business. I was also thinking about, a kind of a management position in the music management. So I find this quite interesting, and I envy you a little bit for the choice you made, and I enjoyed the talk here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Tobias, thank you so very, very much. I think you have your next appointment coming up, so we don't want to interfere with your busy program. And John Shakeshaft, he said that Leipzig Opera House is in really good hands, and I think we all feel like this. And thank you so very, very much for taking the time to talk with us so profoundly. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. Thank you for giving me the chance to present a little bit of Leipzig Opera House. And of course, I invite you cordially to come to Leipzig and have a live picture yourself. And if you do, I'll show you the beautiful building, which is the only theater that's been built in GDR times. And so we've got a very fascinating irony about socialist decadence, but that's a different story. So do come along, visit us. And thank you very much that I had the chance to talk to you today.
Thank you so much. And if you
thank you very much.
Come to Tokyo, please let me know, and we'll organize a Trinity dinner with you. And
fantastic. Thank you.
Opera House to come to Japan will need some more planning, I think.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. All the best.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.